Hello and welcome to episode 111 of MMO Weekly, presented as always by Chitty's Cheesesteaks. I'm your host, Sal Manzo, joined by a very special guest, Miracle Met, author, all-time Met player. Everyone knows him as Art Shamsky. Art, thank you so much for taking the time today.
It's great to be with you, Sal. Thank you.
Thank you. I know we had a little problems before, but in life and baseball, right, sometimes you get curveballs. We got to figure out how to deal with that, and kept the hands back and kept it working, so I'm happy about that.
The key is you're able to handle it and no panic, and you did a great job.
Thank you. But obviously, we have you here as member of the Miracle Mets. I want to obviously talk about that, which kind of ties into another reason why we're here. You have a new book out, kind of talking those tales about the days with the Mets, stories that you want to tell your teammates. I know you've had a book before come out about the 69 Mets. I'll get to that too. But just want to give us kind of a synopsis on the new book, what people could, maybe be interested in hearing, stories maybe they haven't heard before that'll be in the book. Just curious to hear about how this came about.
Well, it's really my third book. The first book was Magnificent Seasons about 1969 when the Jets won the Super Bowl. We won the World Series. And of course, the Knicks won the NBA championship in May of 70. It was really a book about history and looking at all those three teams. And what's interesting about those teams is that nobody had ever won before, which really made it interesting. And it was really, you have to put it in the context of what was going on in the city and the country and the world at the time. The war in Vietnam was just tearing the country apart, and the city was going under in many ways, financially, socially, spiritually, morally. And what we did, the three teams, has kind of made people feel better about their lives at the time. And to this day, I'm still getting people coming up to me and saying thank you for making them feel a little bit better about what was going on back then, particularly Vietnam veterans who come up to me and say, gosh, I was in this worst place you could ever be. And I heard the Mets were winning and the Knicks were winning, whatever it was. And some of them even fired off their weapons. But it really makes me feel good to know that we made people feel a little bit better about their lives. And then the second book was really after the miracle of 50-year anniversary about camaraderie and friendships that had developed on that team. And a lot had to do with the fact that even though I wasn't there in the early years, the 62, 63, 64, and so on, and when they were losing 100 games and more every year, the fact that we were such a bad team, even in 68, my first year, we finished ninth, a half game out of last place, and there was no division baseball at the time. So I think if people look at that and realize where we came from and go ahead and win not only a division, but a pennant and a World Series. And they pass it on from generation to generation, talking about things that even if they weren't around, they've heard about and knew about from that team. And so that was my second book. And the new one that you mentioned, which is really doing well, it's called Met Stories I Only Tell My Friends. I was just trying to figure out, I'm never going to be a novelist writing these love stories or these deep theory books. It's really going to be about my experiences, basically playing with the Mets and playing baseball. And so I was just trying to figure out what I could write about. And somebody mentioned this book that former President Dwight Eisenhower wrote way back in the 50s, right before he became president, called At Ease, Stories I Only Tell My Friends. And it was really a kind of a book that it talked about things that maybe the average person didn't know about, and he wanted to explain. And so that's really that was the key to me thinking about doing this book. And it's really some interesting stories that I talk about, how I even found out I got traded to the Mets, my experiences early in my years with the Cincinnati Reds before I came over to the Mets. But really, it's mostly about my Met experiences and some of the things that I experienced on the field and off the field. What this book isn't going to do is going to nail one of my teammates because he did something that people really wanted to know about. It really is kind of a fun kind of look at things that happen, and a little bit of seriousness, but really about some things that I think people would find really interesting and that they haven't heard about before. And so that's really what the book's about, and it's really been doing really well, and I appreciate you even mentioning it. Thank you.
No, absolutely. Seems really interesting. You just talked about kind of the trade from Cincinnati to the Mets, right, earlier in your career. Was there any sort of like sadness or trepidation? Because did you see what was going on with Cincinnati? That there was, you had Pete Rose, the Big Red Machines coming there, Johnny Bench. I don't know if Joe Morgan was there at that point, if he was still in Houston. But like, were you bummed a little bit, going, oh man, I'm leaving this team that seems like they got so much going for them, and now going to, before that, the Mets were obviously kind of those perennial lovable losers when they first came in the league. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what your thoughts were going from a team like Cincinnati and then to New York.
Well, I spent 8 years with them in the minor leagues and the big leagues. Started my career way back in 1960 with Pete Rose and Tony Perez. We were teammates in Class D baseball at a little small town upstate New York, Geneva, New York. It was the New York Penn League, and we all kind of grew up together. We were riding buses, station wagons, whatever it might be. We were all just trying to get to the next level. And I had come off a year in 1966 where I really did well. I had over 20 home runs. It was one of the best ratios in the big leagues, home run at bats. And the next year, 1967, I got hurt, which was the first time that I really got hurt. And baseball and other sports, you got to stay healthy. And ended up not having a great year. And I was back home in St. Louis after that season. And again, after having spent 8 years with the Reds, and I just had surgery on my back, the first of a number of surgeries I've had over the years. And I got this call from the general manager of the Reds at the time. His name is Bob Housem. It really doesn't make much difference about who it was, but it was the general manager of the Reds at the time. And I actually thought he was calling to see how I was feeling. So before he could say anything, I said to Mr. Housem, I just want you to know I feel great. And I wasn't feeling terrific because I had just got out of the hospital. I said, I'm looking forward to next year. And he said, well, that's great because we just traded you this morning. And so that was the first I heard about being traded. And again, the shock of initially hearing it for the first time is always funny because you're leaving friends that you grew up with, that you shared these moments with. And again, 8 years there. And so I was at first initially shocked, but finally I realized I better find out where I got traded to. And I said, by the way, where did I get traded to? And he said, we traded you to New York. And my first reaction, well, I'm in St. Louis. Yogi Berra, a great Yankee player, was from St. Louis, that we had something in common. I said to myself, I could break a bat and hit one out in right field there, 300 feet down the line. I said, oh my gosh, the Yankees, who from the Yankees is going to call you? And he said, no, it's the other team in New York. Well, the other team in New York, as we know at the time, was losing 100 games every year. And if you didn't win 2 out of 3 games against them, it was a bad series. And I said, oh, no, the Mets. I wasn't crazy about New York coming here as a visiting player. But as it turned out in the long run, it was the best thing that ever happened in my career because 2 years later, we won the World Series. But initially, I was in shock. But here's the kicker to that whole story. I finally said to him, well, who from the Mets is going to call me? And he said, well, the general manager, Bing Devine, who I think you know. And really, I did know him because I grew up in St. Louis. And Bing Devine was then, for a while, was the general manager of the Cardinals. And so I was always trying to sneak in these tryout camps when I was 14 years old. They would always kick me out. They'd grab me by the collar and just pull me out of these tryout camps. And one day he came out to me and said, you're too young. You can't come here anymore. So I did have a little bit of knowledge with him, but he called and he made me feel a lot better. He said, we're a good young team up and coming. And I kind of scratched my head and I said, is he talking about the same team that I think he's talking about? Again, they were losing 100 games a year, but he really made me feel a lot better about the trade. He said, we want you to come to New York and we're going to be doing fine and all this stuff. And I hung up the phone and I felt a little bit better. But the kicker was about 2 days later, I picked up a paper in St. Louis and read where he left the Mets and came back to the Cardinals as general manager. So I was the last trade he made after having told me that it was a great place to be. But again, it turned out to be the best thing that could have happened in my career. I'm still in New York because of it, still talking about the 1969 Mets, an incredible team. And, unfortunately, we've lost too many guys from that team, but it's to be part of that team, it's still talked about today, 56 years later, for me, is always going to be special. And I get a chance to talk to wonderful sports people like yourself who reminisce, even though you might not have been born. You weren't around, but you know about that team because of the greatness of Tom Seaver and Cleon Jones and Tommy Agee and Kuzman and all the guys that were on that team. And for me, it's always going to be special reminiscing about it. it's interesting, Sal. I tell people, and some say that they agree with me and some don't, but I really believe that the 69 Mets are one of two teams in baseball that'll live on forever. One of them being the 27 Yankees with Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig and those great players. And it's going to be 100 years for them
Sure.
in 2 years from now. And the 69 Mets, I mean, other teams have won championships, other great teams. We certainly weren't the greatest team ever to win, but the circumstances that led us to win really kind of played the background to why people still talk about that team. And for me, it's always going to be special. I played 13 years. Nobody ever talks about the other 12. It's really about 1969, and I understand it, and I'm so happy to have been part of it. And like I said, unfortunately, we've lost too many guys from that team, but there's still a nucleus of guys around that when I get a chance to spend some time with them, it's always going to be special, and people will always remember what. And I saw the other day, I don't know if you happen to see it. I think it was the 7th of this month, July, where that was the almost perfect game that Tom Seaver pitched back then that became famous because it was an almost perfect game. And probably he got more notoriety on that game than he would have probably if he pitched a perfect game. Well, who knows? But there was it was things that happened like that all year that people remember and want to talk about. And it was really funny about it. Over the years, I probably had 100,000 people tell me they were at the last game when we won the World Series in 1969, October 16th. And I say to myself, oh, great. The ballpark held about 53,000. But if they were there, great. If they weren't there in reality, but were there in their mind, that's fine too, because it was a special time. And so many people over the years have told me they went on the field and grabbed some dirt or some grass and, saved it and were there running on there. It wasn't much crowd control back in those days. So people just ran on the field, but it was such an exciting time. And for me, it's always a pleasure and thrill to talk about it. And that's been a long-winded story, I know, but that's really why I write these books, because I think it does make people smile and reminisce and brings me, it makes our youth never goes away when we talk about it. That's the reality of it.
Absolutely. And, it's awesome hearing about these stories. And I guess like to follow up with all this, like you're saying, when this was going on, you're going through that summer of 69, you talk about the Seaver imperfect game being so culturally relevant, 6 decades later now. Is that something that you guys were thinking about as this was happening, you making your run? Obviously, you're worried about a championship. That's in the short term. But did you guys ever really think that, winning this thing that decades and decades later that it would be as poignant as it still is with the fan base?
No, that's a great question. I think we were so overwhelmed when we won because we had come from a place that nobody thought we could do it. We were still 9 games behind the Cubs in that Eastern Division in August, and all of a sudden we just played unbelievable ball. And I think there's all sorts of circumstances to lead to why this team is so popular today. Part of it is what I said before, is that where they came from. The team was so bad in those early years, known as the lovable losers. Part of it, what was going on in New York and in the country at the time. And the other thing I think is that we ended up beating a really good Atlanta Braves team that had Hank Aaron and Rico Cordy and Felipe Alou, Orlando Cepeda, a really good Atlanta team in the playoffs, which was the first playoffs that time. And I had a real good series. I had 7 hits and 13 at bats that people still talk to me about. But the third thing I think that people tend to forget is that we beat a Baltimore Oriole team in the World Series that many thought was one of the best teams of that era. They won 107 or 108 games in a regular season. They breezed through the playoffs, and we lost the first game of the World Series. I ended up making the last out of the first game of the World Series, and everybody thought we were going to lose 4 in a row. And Jerry Koosman pitched a great game on that Sunday. The next day in Baltimore, we came back to New York, 1-1, and everybody still thought we were going to lose the next 3 in a row. And we ended up winning that third game. That was the Gary Gentry against the Palmer game. And of course, then Swoboda's great catch in Game 4 in right field, and all sorts of things happened. But I think those 3 things are the combination why people still remember it, because of how it all came about, the timing, and of course beating this terrific Baltimore Oriole team in the World Series.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, and people don't remember the next year the Orioles ran roughshod through the league. They won the World Series. They're a phenomenal team. You know, it was a huge upset. I myself, I've watched the games on YouTube as the years have gone on. Watched the games myself to just to get a feel for it. Watching the broadcast for them is really cool from behind the catcher. So different, seeing all that. But I guess to piggyback on all that, two people that obviously stick out from the '69 Mets in that time is Tom Seaver and your manager Gil Hodges. Can you just talk about those two guys and how each made the impacting to get the Mets on that turnaround to what you did to make that championship run, how much they each meant to the
Well,
organization?
Seaver was just an incredible pitcher in an era that had incredible pitchers,
Yep.
particularly in the National League. I remember in 1967, Tom's first year, I was with the Reds, and he was Rookie of the Year that year. I think he won 17 or 18 games and was Rookie of the Year. I remember batted against him with the Reds in a game in Shea Stadium, and he was winning 7-0 in 2 outs in the ninth. I hit a 3-run home run, and a meaningless home run, but for me, I'm happy to hit a home run. But and the next year I got traded over, and I remember spring training in '68, my first year. I was going around saying hello to the guys, and I went up to Tom and I said, "Tom, it's Art." And before I could even say my name, he said, "I know who you are." He said, "I remember that day in June when you hit that 3-run home run." He said, "We can talk about it today, but let's never talk about it again." So, and we never did, but we smiled about it back then. And watching him pitch, particularly if he got a chance to play first base like I did a little bit, watching him work the hitters, watching him, he was really I don't know how to. He was a surgeon, for lack of a better word. He was this doctor on the mound that worked hitters. And I remember I made that last out in the game where he struck out 11 in a row against San Diego. I think he had 18 or 19 strikeouts, and I don't remember how many strikeouts, but he struck out the last. He struck out a lot of players, but I think 11 in a row, if I'm not mistaken. Was it 11 in a row? But anyway, he had this great game going, and yeah, it was 11. It was 11 strikeouts in a row, and I caught the last out with 1 out. I believe it was in the sixth inning, and then he proceeded to strike out the next 11 in a row. But watching him pitch, it was like a professor. I mean, he was such a great competitor and a great pitcher. And I do think history will show he's one of the greatest pitchers ever to pitch in the big leagues. And he won 311 games and 230 something complete games. Incredible statistics, but certainly was the catalyst on that team to help us win. But he also had some help. Jerry Koosman had a great year as a second pitcher, and Gary Gentry was the third pitcher. And of course, we had Nolan Ryan and Tug McGraw and a lot of good pitchers on that team. But just Seaver was just an unbelievable pitcher, and it was an honor to play with him. And I saw the best of both worlds, against him and with him. And he was just, if you said who was the best pitcher in that era, you'd have to say Koufax or Gibson or Marichal or all those guys, but you got to put him right there with all of them because he was as good, if not better, than all of them. So, I was lucky to play with and against him.
Absolutely. And can you, kind of talk a little bit too to that point, just how Gil Hodges had an impact on the Mets and how he turned them into, felt like winners overnight almost. I know, plenty of guys over the years have talked about how much he meant, but I'd love to hear, from you as well.
Well, I was there at the same time. He came over in '68, my first year, along with Tommy Agee and Al Weiss, J.C. Morton, a couple other guys. We all started the same time Gil came over. And I remember a meeting he had the very first day in spring training in '68. I never met him. I had watched him as a kid growing up, how great he was with the Brooklyn Dodgers, what a fabulous ball player he was. And I had heard these things about him, very tough but fair manager and no nonsense, and which was all true. But this very first day in spring training, he had this meeting, and he said, "I just want everybody to know that you will not be the same old Mets you've been in the past." Well, that just right there set the stage for everything because, I hadn't been there when the team was really the lovable losers, but I knew what he meant, and he was right. He started from that day one, and even though we didn't play that great that year, you could see the beginnings of a team that was going to do it right, eventually do it right on and off the field, and he was that kind of manager. And I remember the next year in spring training, after we finished ninth, a half game out of last place in the National League, And then they went to division play, had another meeting in 69, this spring training. None of us are thinking about the World Series, but he's having this meeting saying, you know, you guys, I don't know if you realize it, but you lost 30 something one games. He said, you know how to lose games. You got to find ways to win games. And that just told me that, explained to me that he was a guy that wanted to find ways to win, whether it's sacrificing, hit and run, stealing a base, moving that runner over from second to third, sacrifice fly, whatever it was. And he wasn't. And then he said, which was interesting, I'm not talking 2-0, 2-1, 3-2. I'm talking find ways to win 10-9, 7-6. You know, find ways to win games. And that just told me that he was a manager that wanted to find that managed by feel. He knew everybody on the team. He didn't need printouts. He didn't need sabermetrics, which are very popular now. He didn't need that. He had a feel for the game, and I respected him for that. And it turned out he was right. Now, and I do believe if he would have lived longer, the Mets would have won more World Series. It unfortunately passed away in spring of '72. But he was a guy that was no nonsense and fair. I mean, if you had I could count on one hand the number of times I really had a one-to-one conversation with him, but that was okay because I knew when I was going to play, and I had a feel sometimes if I was on the bench, he was going to pinch hit me. You could feel it. You had this sense because he instilled that in you, and it turned out that he made everybody ready to play. And if you talk about the '69 Mets, you talk about everybody because at some point everybody on that team, all the way to the lowest guy on the bench, contributed to the success of the team because he made everybody feel part of it. And unfortunately, he died at such a young age. But here's this big, strong guy who you think is going to live forever, and turned out he died 3 days short of his 48th birthday. But as I mentioned earlier, I do believe the Mets would have been more successful if he would have lived longer because he was a terrific manager. Again, I can count on one hand the number of times I actually went and had a one-on-one conversation with him. But I'll tell you a funny story real quick, and I write about it a little bit in the book. And in the Mets clubhouse, when you went out to the field, you had to walk by his dressing room. He had a little room on the right, and I always felt that that door was closed. Somebody was getting chewed out. Somebody was getting some bad news. And if you walked by and it was open and he didn't call you in, you were already ahead in the game. You already felt like you had a couple of hits in the game. But I always enjoyed whatever conversations I had with him. I enjoyed, but they were always kind of arm's length, and that was fine because I didn't need to get patted on the back for something good. And when he felt like there was something he had to say to somebody, it wasn't when he wouldn't embarrass anybody in front of the team. He would grab you by the side and talk to you. And he was a terrific manager, no nonsense. But I think everybody who played for him respected what he had to say.
Yeah, no, it seems to be the recurring thing whenever you hear anybody talk about Gil, right? And finally got into the Baseball Hall of Fame. Well overdue for him. Glad that finally happened. But that was actually a question I was going to ask you to get answered as far as if you thought, obviously, him passing away prematurely kind of set the team back as far as where they were. It seems like that happened. Obviously, they make that run in '73 and don't win. But really, it's a baseball royalty for Gil Howard. It's a New York baseball royalty, right? So it was only fitting that he helped steer the ship to the '69 Mets, too. Real quick, I have to ask, obviously, we lost Ed Kranepool recently. Tremendous Met, miracle Met like yourself. You just kind of talk a little bit about Ed and what he was like being teammates with him and just being another, kind of fun representative of the Mets, it felt like, for decades and decades.
Yeah, unfortunately, we lost 5 guys last year, and Eddie was part of that group. I had so much fun with Eddie over the years. We probably did, I don't know, 500 to 1,000 appearances together. We would do things all the time, and Eddie was really truly Mr. Met over the years. 18 years with the same team. They got the patch on the sleeves out there now, and what's really funny about my experiences with Eddie is that whenever I went out with him and we were someplace, inevitably somebody would come up to him and say, Eddie Kranepool, right? Yeah, I'm Eddie Kranepool. They say, Monroe High School in the Bronx. He said, yeah, I went to Monroe. And they would always say to him, I was in your graduating class. And I said, Eddie, when we had a quiet moment, I said, Eddie, how many people were in your graduating class? He said, I don't know, 1,000, 1,200. I said, 25,000 people have said they were in your graduating class. everybody wanted to be associated with him.
Sure.
You know, he had these three things about him that I think people really loved. The fact that he was New Yorker, a New York kid, the fact that he spent 18 years with the Mets and no other team, and everybody associated with him. And you know, he was a local Monroe High School Bronx kid, and I think he had street sports. Eddie was just a great guy. He was the player rep for the team, and he was like 21 or 22 years old, and then went on to have it. You know, when we were there as a little bit older, but you know, he was on top of everything. And I had lunch with him the Thursday before he passed away, and when I heard about it, it was really a shock. And again, we've lost too many guys from that team, but I think Eddie will be remembered for being there for 18 years, and you won't see that much anymore in baseball or any sport that guy
Yeah.
stays with a team a long time. And he had the wherewithal to be part of that era. And I remember when he hit a home run in Game 3, the World Series. He hit a home run, and we won that game. We beat Jim Palmer, and I remember saying to myself when he hit the home run, and I forget the score of the game, but I said, you know, this must be real kind of this must be very special for him because he was there for the good, the bad, and the ugly. He was there in '62 when they lost 120 games and all those years, and now he hits a home run in the World Series. And I'm thinking, this is really kind of nice retribution for somebody that spent and that he still played another number of years, but I just felt like it was really important for him to get that feeling of accomplishment that because he had seen so many bad years. But that loss was tough for me because we had spent so many things together, and even though he was younger with me, he was a wise person. He was street smart, like I said, and
Sure.
and I think that was one of his great attributes.
Yeah, and the forever Met. Always, you go to City Field, you'll always see, number 7 pictures and all that. He was at so many events, and his presence will always be there. That's for sure. Just part of an iconic team, and like you said, one of the original Mets too, which is crazy to think about. But last kind of question I have to wrap it up. I don't want to keep you here all day, but I was wondering if you kind of have a favorite Mets '69 Mets cameo, whether it's a show, anything like that was really exciting for you or fun for you to be on. I know growing up, I watched Everybody Loves Raymond with my family. That's one of my favorite episodes when you guys are there and Ray and Robert go, and obviously Robert's dog named Shamsky. He showed you the collar, and you're like, "What is this?" But I'm just wondering if I'm sure you have so many from, like I said, from all these decades, just being so culturally relevant. But I'm just curious if you have like a favorite kind of cameo.
Sal, there was so many of them, and a lot of them had to do with Eddie and myself doing things
Yeah.
that, we did. Eddie and I did Sesame Street when they first went on the air in uniform. We counted 1 to 10 and then 10 to 20, and they really didn't have a big stage and everything. It was kind of like made up thing, and it was really a fun thing. And he would toss the ball and I'd swing and miss, and then we reversed roles, and we did, like I said, 1 to 10, 10 to 20, and the kids would count. And that was a great experience. And then we were on the Ed Sullivan Show singing after we won the World Series. And then it took 7 of us to Las Vegas to sing in a show about a week and a half after we won the World Series, and spent 17 days out there making fools of ourselves, 2 shows a night, a dinner show and early in a tuxedo, and then a regular casual show at night. And that experience was something I'll never forget. But there was so many things that we did over the years that because we were part of that '69 Met team, and I just think that I feel very lucky. One of the questions I get all the time is, "Don't you wish you were playing now, making all that money?" And I want to say to the person, "What are you, crazy? Of course I do. I wish I was playing now." It was a different world. The guys before us probably thought we were making too much, and we really weren't making much at all. And the numbers are just outrageous now. And I feel like more power to the guys now. Whatever they can get, fine. I just know that we went out on strike in '72, which really led to the beginning of free agency and designated hitter and arbitration and all those things. So I hope at some point guys appreciate all the things that we did and the guys before us to get them where they're at now. But one of the questions I always get is, "Don't you wish you were making the money?" And I say, yeah, but I wouldn't trade it for 2 things. One is the World Series ring that I have from that team. It is so special, and it's just I love for kids to try it on, for kids to look at it and see what it means and take pictures with it. That's always a great time for me. And the other thing is, I think that people tend to forget is that I was lucky enough to play in an era that I think had the greatest conglomerate of players in the history of the game, with and against them. I came up with the
Sure.
Reds. I played against Mays, Aaron, Clemente, Stargell, McCovey. Uh, I played with Bench. I played with Frank Robinson. I played with Rose, Koufax, Drysdale, Marichal, Gibson, Seaver, Steve Carlton, Jim Bunning, Ferguson Jenkins. I mean, the list goes on and on. So to be able to play in that era and say I shared these great moments with these terrific players. I think more players in the Hall of Fame from the 60s and early 70s when I played that because there was such great competition back then. And so I have great memories about that. So yes, do I wish I was playing now and under these circumstances? Of course, but I wouldn't trade it for being part of that 69 Met team. And of course, playing in an era that had all these great players. So I feel very lucky. And again, I get a chance to talk to wonderful sports people like yourself.
It's incredible. Hard to argue. Hard to argue all those players that's not the golden age of baseball. No arguments here. That's incredible. But we're going to wrap it up there. Art, thank you so much for coming on the show. This was awesome. I could talk to you all day about this. And, hopefully the next time we speak, maybe there'll be a new World Series team. They can have their, their new thing of history, and fans like me who've never seen one can finally see it. But until then, they'll keep fighting away, and the 69 Mets are going to be one of the all-time great teams in Major League Baseball.
Well, thanks for having me on, Sal. Anytime. I really appreciate it. You did a great job.
Same here. Thanks as always. And as always, everybody, let's go Mets.